Hey guys, this is Jay Calder with Jay Unboxing here, going over the week's biggest fights involving some of the biggest fighters and, of course, some of the biggest events of the weekend and handing out some fighter grades. And as always, I'm always curious to know what you guys think about these fights and these performances. Who do you think stood out as the best? Who disappointed you? All of that good stuff. I'd love to hear that down in the comments section below. Love hearing it all. And it's a very interesting week of fights with a lot of showcase fights and a lot of kind of career building fights. Manchester, you had a couple of step up fights in terms of Conor Benn especially, which we'll be getting into, of course. And then, of course, on the undercard for Yordenis, Ugas versus Errol Spence, you had a couple of stay busy fights for some more prominent names that really did put forth some very interesting results. And then, of course, we had the sort of crown jewel of the weekend, so to speak, being that Spence versus Ugas fight, which, of course, we'll be getting into. And it was a great fight and just a great result, a great performance by Spence especially. So we'll be getting into that, of course, as well. So without much more rambling, let's hand out these grades. We're going to start on the other side of the Atlantic here with Chris Billam-Smith, who defeated Tommy McCarthy via 8-round knockout, retaining his European and Commonwealth cruiserweight titles. And the grade that I'm going to go with is an A-. And this grade kind of stems from just a couple of things. Primarily from how well he improved from their first fight. You know, in that first fight, he got buzzed a little bit, got outboxed out times, and he kind of had to play catch-up down the stretch of that fight to win a relatively close one. In this fight, he really went through the gears a lot better, stayed far more composed, put his power shots together a little better, didn't get hit by too many bad shots. That was probably the one drawback here, why this isn't an A+, so to speak. He did get hit a little bit silly, sometimes overcommitting, but at the same time, he is still a relative novice as a professional and still put in a very, very solid performance. He got better since the last time he was out. He got better since their first encounter and really put a stamp on this rivalry and now can move forward onto bigger and better things after, honestly, probably the performance of his career at this point. So very good performance for him, which is why he gets such a high mark. Next fighter we're going to go with here is Conor Benn, who headlined that Manchester show, defeating Chris Van-Heerden via 2-round knockout in the welterweight division. Grade he's also going to be getting is an A-. Can he be flawed? Yes, a bit wild at times, kind of overcommits, and he can be hit. You know, he was tagged a few times by Van-Heerden, who was trying to counter and kind of stay in the pocket and not necessarily fight fire with fire, but just kind of showing you that Ben does have some ability to be hit at times and kind of taking advantage of that. But he wanted to make a statement, he being Ben, and he did. A very good one at that. You know, ultimately this was the reason he's matched against Van-Heerden is because he's trying to showcase, he and his team, that he is better than an Errol Spence or a Boots Ennis who have taken on Van-Heerden, maybe not put forth the same performance he did tonight. While that doesn't necessarily mean anything as it pertains to how well he would do against those guys, he did take care of him in better fashion, and that kind of bodes well for at least his ability to show some great punching power, but also to market him, which is, you know, part of the battle here. And I will say this, too, in closing here on Ben here, regardless of what you think of the rest of his performance, wild punches, being hit, this, that, and the third, he has legitimate power, if anything else, and that keeps him very interesting at 147 pounds for sure. Now, the next fighter we're going to go here is Errol Spence, who defeated Yordenis via 10-round technical knockout, retaining his IBF and WBC welterweight titles and claiming the WBA welterweight title in the process. Grade I also will be going with here is an A-, he said, being super redundant. Now, I have to say this is kind of a weird grade because you want to score this to some degree in a vacuum. However, with the Terence Crawford fight looming, it makes you question what this result says about his chances in that highly anticipated confrontation. Still, that seems unfair to Spence, who put forth a great performance, and I don't really want to do that. So whether or not I think this performance bodes well for Spence in that fight is kind of inconsequential. I really just have to focus on how good he looked in this fight. Now, I will get off some of the negatives here. The biggest issue was kind of his lapse in concentration in those middle frames, especially when he was tagged after his mouthpiece fell out, and some could argue the ropes kept him up. It could have been considered a knockdown, and certainly he was buzzed, whether he wants to admit that or not. That's the sort of thing that, again, against an opponent maybe with a little more bite in his game, you're not going to be made to pay for those kinds of mistakes, and by his own admission, it's certainly a rookie mistake. That being said, it kind of does, to some degree, feed into how good this performance was, because he started off very well, yes, had that momentary lapse, and I also will admit, he was hurt to the body a couple of times a little later in that fight, but overall, he was still able to take all of that in, come forward and continue to be a super aggressive fighter, very fun to watch in this fight. put his combinations together really well. His shot selection was very good, and obviously he carried his power well into the fight and was very punishing of Ugas, who, to his credit, was brave, which I'll be getting into in a little bit, but really overmatched, especially down the stretch. And of course, as a result, Spence picks up, a pretty big win in his career, unifies part of the division, most of the division, wins 3/4 of the titles, and of course, moves one step closer to complete unification. So certainly a very good win for him, which is why he gets such a damn good grade. Speaking of Ugas, that'll be the next fighter we're going with here. Of course, Yordenis Ugas, who lost to Errol Spence via 10-round technical knockout, losing his WBA title in the process in that unification bout. The grade that I'm going to be going with here is a B-. Should have said A- just for fun to continue the theme, even though that's obviously not true. In any event, I'm going to be honest with you. Part of the reason why I'm giving him such a high grade is because he tried. He actually looked like he tried, in the sense that at the very least he was willing to compete and throw punches. I know people wanted him to throw more. I just don't know if that's his nature. Even in fights when you watched him against, say, Sean Porter, he kind of picks his spots. He just happened to do it against fighters who are not Errol Spence. He did it against Sean Porter, who was kind of getting up there in age, and certainly, is not necessarily the very best of the division. He's kind of come short as one of the very best in the division. Or against an aging Manny Pacquiao, he was able to do it. But when you're going up against another prime elite athlete in Errol Spence, you just need to be able to pull the trigger a little bit more. And I just don't think Ugas really has that. What I will fault him on as well, though, that he does have is he has a better outside game than he does inside, and yet he really elected to fight almost exclusively on the inside from the very beginning. And while I think that was important to kind of establish he is a stronger guy than Spence on the inside, which when fresh he was, I don't think it was a better game plan to fight exclusively on the inside. Obviously, that was his undoing because he just started eating far too many body shots and uppercuts, which are kind of what really led to him losing this fight. And so I really do have to give him a bit of a downgrade there. What I will say, the reason that it stops it from being some sort of C grade is because he did want to keep fighting. Even when the doctor was kind of in those corners, you could tell it hurt him that this fight was being stopped or even threatened to be stopped. And I think at the very least, I like to reward that kind of mentality. He still was throwing shots. I do believe I even gave him one of the later rounds just based on the sheer fact that he was tagging Spence to the body pretty hard. But again, that kind of goes to show just how short he fell when Spence would come right back and make it even worse for him. So kind of a conflicting grade there, but I don't want to go too hard on a guy who, at the very least, shows you what it looks like when a fighter legitimately doesn't want the fight to be stopped. So I give him a little bit of extra credit there. And the fifth fighter here is Imani Stanionis, who defeated Radzab Butayev via 12-round split decision. Should have been a unanimous decision, whatever. Picking up a portion of the WBA welterweight title, even though the main card's main event had the WBA title in it as well, because boxing. And the grade I'm going to go with is a B+ for Stanionis. Now, it's a title-winning performance, sort of. Still, the performance itself was pretty damn good, so it can't all be that bad. I will say he got hit a bit too much, certainly can get tagged, and at times he tends to throw his punches at too much at the same speed. I think he would benefit from varying that a little bit from time to time. Kind of hard to do against a Butayev who continues to come and is making it a rough, tough sort of fight. He also marks up, I will say, though he was tagged by a few elbows in there as well. So again, areas where he can improve upon, of course, but he was very physically strong, a very tough welterweight, hard hitting, had a great power jab, really snapped the head of Butayev back, and I really like seeing that as well. So he's going to be a tough out for almost anyone at 147 pounds. I don't quite yet know just how well he will do against the very elite 147 pounders, because again, part of why I would have picked Butayev in this fight to win, which I probably would have done, is because Stanionis really struggled with any kind of movement when he even faced like a Thomas Delorme. Butayev stood far more in front of him, and that allowed for him to be significantly more successful. A lot of the best names at 147 pounds have movement in their game and can punch pretty damn hard themselves, so it's hard to see just how well he could do against that upper echelon, but still, at the very least, solid performance, solid fighter, so it'll be fun to see him kind of carry on his career in these next couple of years. Honorable mention here goes to Cody Crowley, who defeated Josecito Lopez via 10-round unanimous decision in the welterweight division. Grade I would have gone with there is kind of like a B. It kind of made Lopez show his age, and really against him was able to show his slickness and skills. He can be hit at times, sure, because he does get a little too overconfident with some of his offense, and I don't really think he has a great deal of power, but his conditioning seems to be great, and certainly is someone who, is very fun and skillful to watch. Where I would concern myself if I'm him is if he doesn't have the sort of power to keep someone like a Stanionis, for example, off of him. I wonder how well he could box in those kinds of fights. Again, Stanionis does sort of struggle with movement, so it's an interesting fight, just kind of off the top of my head, but that would be perhaps my area of concern, but still pretty solid performance. Also give a shout out here to Isak Cruz, who defeated Yordenis Gamboa via 5-round technical knockout. In the lightweight division, great, I would have gone there with his a B+. Cruz looked a little wild at times, but there was purpose. He wanted to build off the loss, so to speak, to Gervonta Davis. That gave him so much credibility. And by stopping Gamboa in a dominant fashion on a big show, he did. We didn't learn really anything new about him. That's why it's kind of hard to give him much of a higher grade if I were to have graded him on a more thorough level, but certainly the sort of performance he was looking to have, taking advantage of yet another stage that he's been granted. So good for him, good performance from him overall. In any event, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Would love to hear your thoughts, all of your kind of grades as well, what you disagree with, what you agree with, who was kind of your standout performer of the weekend. Would love to hear that. Of course, please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at jcalderon_JOB, and you can email me at jagonboxing@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you there. Also, be sure to check out jagonboxing.com for schedule, results, betting odds, rankings, and more. Of course, later this week, be sure to check out my predictions for this upcoming weekend's fights. Of course, we'll have those out as well. And as always, until next time.